Hi everybody. Well, another rainy day in New York City. So I thought I would paint something for you. Yeah, I'm going it's a little bit out on a limb, but overall topics I want to go over, I guess, would be it's an interior courtyard. It's an exterior space, but it functions primarily like an external room. So I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about painting interior spaces. A lot of the principles will hold true. It's a fairly simple one-point perspective, but there are some perspective issues too. But where we are is here. This was I was on a painting trip in China a couple of years back, and they put us up for a few nights at this amazing guest house out in the country. It was ancient, hundreds of years old, with all these beautiful traditional characteristic elements, primarily the woodwork, doors, windows, the leaded glass, the tracery of the window, traditional Chinese lanterns, etc. There's just a lot to talk about architecturally, but I don't want to go into all that in great detail. I think for the purposes of today, it was just a contemplative, beautiful, quiet space. So we were sleeping on the upper levels, and you look down from these balconies into this courtyard. And there's this great rough-hewn old table down there that I used a couple of mornings just to sit and do some quick sketches and that sort of thing. So I wanted to take these two photo images I had of it and then recreate an image that I'm doing today. So I started designing it here in my sketchbook, thinking I wanted a view inside the court, closer up, featuring a figure sitting at the table. It's not me exactly, but it's not anyone in particular. It's an avatar. It could be me, it could be you, it could be anybody you know. It could just be the idea of a human sitting here in this courtyard. I developed that little sketch into another scrappy little sketch here, just trying to work out the composition of elements, visual elements, and also here begin to think about the arrangement of values throughout. It's a very low lit space, and it was, I want to do this on a somewhat overcast day. That's my hope, so that I get a gentle, hopefully successful, appealing, filtered light coming through the open oculus in the ceiling, illuminating the figure at the table, which will be my center of focus. But I don't want this stark, striking, hard-edged sun shade that I often paint. Not that it's wrong, I just think for the story I'm trying to tell here, for my intention, I want to paint a quieter, more contemplative space. And so you, as the artist, can think about, well, what is it I can do to make that happen? I think a narrower range of values, so not from stark white to jet black, but somewhere more contained in the darker to lighter gray tone value range. Also edges you can think about, rather than having really crisp, hard edges or too many of them, where light turns to shade or shadow. Won't say I won't have any of those, but I'm going to probably play them down and play up more a gradual gradation of light, from light here hitting the figure at the table, light here filtering through the top, and then I want to set up an intricate and I hope successful story or path of light connecting the source of light at the top, glinting off the balconies here at the upper midsection, and then landing down here at the lower part of the courtyard, a little bit of the table and the figure, of course. I think when I look at this, there's a bit of dominance of dark. One of these reference photos, through the windows here, you can see through a dining room out to the outside, or at least sense it. So I think I will probably learn from that, and I'll add some more subtle, I hope, lights reading through this tracery of glass, wood, etc. So it'll look hopefully appealingly busy, layered, and textured, but also hopefully not distractingly so. I think the whole culture there and my experiences were just meanings of layers of meaning, one on top of the other. And of course, the story of the passing of time. I don't want this little sketch to try to incorporate all of that, but just little glimmers of my overall impressions of staying there and traveling there so many times. So you can see I've redesigned a view that's not really represented by either of my reference photos, something I think is a very valid way to approach a painting. It gets you out of the reality of the photographs and more into the reality of your own artwork and your own heart and your own experience and your own feeling. That, of course, is what I try to make all of my paintings about, my own experiences. Not just things I look at, but how I felt about them. What is it I see? So this is what I see. A person, it could be a guy or a girl, it could be anyone, sitting at a quiet table in this peaceful, softly lit courtyard. So that's what I want to try to do. I'm overall, it's a bit of an experimental approach I'm taking. It's not atypical to what I normally do, but the arrangement of lights is a bit scattershot. I'm fairly confident I'll be able to pull it together, but the center of focus is going to be pretty far down on the page in this case, very near the bottom of the page. I could have opened it up, but I really wanted the sense of connection between the courtyard floor, the upper level, and then vanishing altogether off of the top of the page. So I sketched this up this morning, if I'm honest, a little maniacally. It's probably a tad overdrawn. I told myself I wanted it to be visible on camera, okay. But generally speaking, just word to the wise, despite what I did, it's almost better always to draw a little bit less than you think you need, so you don't maybe almost unconsciously fall into the habit of painting in between the lines and making your final painting too rigid and dry and technical. I do not want that. I want to be true to this beautiful architectural texture that I saw there, but I also don't want to be enslaved to it. I don't want to make it too literal and too, I don't want this to in any way look like an architectural rendering or anything like that. So again, it's that line I'm always trying to walk of featuring the architecture, but not necessarily making it the star of the show. That's what I'm trying to do here. I want to honor the architecture rather than feature it, but not necessarily make it the star of the show. Make it a very beautiful, worthy container for my personal human experience. There are times when you can do drawings, paintings of architectural subjects where they really are the star of the show, but that isn't what I'm trying to do here. So yeah, I'm trying to set up this contrast between the way architecture can inform human experience, but the human experience is a little bit more of the focal point than the architectural container. That's maybe a whole other topic, but there you go. Okay, I'm the painter. I can make colors anything I want them to be, but I think I do want to play up the sense of warmth from the wood. It's old. There's a lot of patina, so there's a lot of modeling of tonalities within the wood. Stonework is beautiful here, but you don't see a lot of it in my sketch, so it's going to be a lot of wood, a lot of light, the effects of light. And I'm a little concerned. It's going to be a dominantly warm painting. So as anybody who's watched my work knows, I always try to set up this series of contrasts, dialogues between two opposite things. The human and the human built. The solid, the void, the positive, the negative shape, darks, lights, verticals, horizontals. I love all these different resonances going on at once in a painting. But when you get into the realm of color, the same thing. I try to set up a nice balance between warm and cool. I don't think they need to be equal. In fact, I don't think they should be. I think each painting should probably be either dominantly cool or dominantly warm, with subnotes of the complements to make it all work. The actuality of the space is dominantly warm, and yes, I could change that, but I do want to play that up. The sort of range of lighter and darker tonalities within the wood, etc. Anyway, I'm a little concerned it's going to be very, very warm, and there's not a lot of elements to cool it down. And I think you could either redesign it or counter that some way, or you could just own it. I've done paintings that are 100% or 99% blue, and others that are 99% warms, reds and oranges and yellows. And it can work if you just own it and make the painting more of a value study with color laid on. So that's my intellectual approach. We'll see how it works. There is some greenery that you could see, some green tones modeling some of the darker, more stained wood and plants on the table, etc. And I will include some greenish tones or cool tones, probably teal within the wood, similar to what you might use in flesh tones if you're painting a figure. But in any case, it's going to be a dominantly warm painting, not because the photo tells me to, but because that's what I want. I'm working on a piece of 140 pound or 300 gram, what is this? Oh, Saunders paper. It's a rough surface, but the Saunders rough has a little bit more, it's a little bit less aggressively textured than even Arch's light, or than say Bao Hung rough. But it does have a beautiful, I think, pretty sophisticated texture, and that's why I wanted to use it. I mean, you might logically think I would do this on Bao Hung since it's a Chinese paper. I could have done, but I really felt the texture in particular of this Saunders would work well for me. So what I'm doing now is just carving light. This is just a big graded wash, very wet, from almost no color, pure just white at the very top or near white, down through the lightest of the warms, the yellows. This is a Naples yellow. And a little bit of French ochre. So I'm painting over everything, as you can see. I'm not saving anything out, at least yet, as saved white paper. This I want light, of course, but these faces of the upper balconies, I want them to be light. But again, I'm going for a narrower value range from light to dark, so I don't think it would be great if they were pure white or saved white paper. This is a Holbein light red. It's a very gentle, sort of earthy warm, almost like a cobalt blue of warm. It's red, but nothing like cadmium or any such thing. I really think of it more in terms of temperature. It really feels more like a warm than a specific color. But what I'm thinking here now is just in my mind assessing how dark I want to get on any of these things. The figure I will save out is unpainted white at the bottom, but I have a moment to stop here. This is so wet, I can take a moment. But I want to think about how much, if any, white I want to save down here at the very bottom of the courtyard. I think a little, so we'll see. Those are things I should have worked out in my sketch, but I really just don't think pure saved white paper, too much of it at least, is the way to go. Also, you can tell I'm a little uncertain how much paint I want to put on these lanterns. These are these traditional red Chinese lanterns. I think I'll save out a bit of white on them, just it may be useful later, and if not, I can get rid of it. Here, as I say, when you look through these open doors through the dining hall, there's another wall similar to this on the exterior of the building, and I want it to remain light but not white. So I'm going to toggle back into some of the lighter warms, yellows. And hope I don't regret that. Probably not. None of what I'm doing is particularly dark yet. You can always get rid of light, but it is very, very hard to get it back once it's gone. So now what I'm doing is just dropping in some additional tonalities. This is the same light red, nothing fancy. I want to start fairly early here to build up some of this patina on the wood and texture that I see. And this is some cobalt teal. You're doing figures and portraiture, I think in watercolor at least, this light red cobalt teal is a very, very successful, often sophisticated combination or a complement toggle between warm and cool. Works well for skin tones, but it has lots of other applications. All right, I'd be well advised to keep this moving. Over here, we're in this shadier part. I can just drop in some of this. This is a Holbein Mineral Violet, which is a violet, of course, but it's not especially purple. It's more a little bit more subtle. It works really well on this beautiful paper. There's another open door. This will be dark, so I can just drop some violet in on that. I guess what I'm hesitating here is I know what to do on this side. I'm wondering if I should save little sparkles of light down here at the very bottom of the wall. Probably overthinking it, but anyway, so I'm going to go to a Escoda half-inch flat brush and paint up from the bottom dry brush to leave some of these sparkles using a this is burnt sienna, so similar to the light red but a bit darker in register. Again, within here it's going to be quite dark. And there could logically be some light here on the horizontal plane of the very base, but I don't know if that'll throw my whole value story off. So I don't want white leading right off the page, so just some dry brush. I'll tone that out without killing all the light. I'll just knock it back a little bit. I think for this stage, that's good. I'll take a smaller round brush. That's the other thing. I'm working at home today, and all of my really good brushes are in the studio, which was stupid, but that's okay. I have backups here. They're just not quite the same, so it's like learning with new tools. Anyway, I chose a round brush. This is an Escoda Versatile, a number 10, a really very useful all-around brush. But I wanted a round with a point so that I could cut in around my seated figure. Some of you, I can hear you, are saying, why don't you just mask him out? No, I don't know why I don't. I like the look of a hand-struck edge in watercolor. And I like the challenge of it too, if I'm honest. It's a bit of an obstinate issue I have. I don't love using masking. I was, as some of you might know, an architectural illustrator for 1,000 years. And it's part of my masking issue. We had to be so specific, so slow, methodical, and detailed for so long. I would spend, days masking out little windows and details on very big paintings, and I think I just became a little traumatized by masking. So I just sort of decided to try to figure out how to paint without it. I say all that not because it's the right thing to do, but just to share with you my little story, why I don't really use masking. But that doesn't mean it has to be yours. Some people use it so beautifully and are quite expert at it. Again, like any skill, if you do it a lot, you get better at it. That's the other thing. It takes a great deal of skill, I think, to be smart about knowing how and when to use masking. Much of this table will not be in bright sun, but for now, because it's so part of the focal point, I'm going to leave much of it unpainted, and I will deal with you later. This is just more of that violet and the shadier area over here. Toggle it with some burnt sienna. A lot of this painting is going to be about not keeping hard edges on purpose, because I want to get this, like I said earlier, this feeling of soft filtered light. And I think softer edges, somewhat more indistinct, less really hard, crisp edges will really help me tell that story. So that kind of painting, I think, will help. There's some lost, some found edges going on in there, and it starts to form the story I want to tell. So overall, the first wash, I think, generally pretty successful. I obviously saved the lightest of the lights. I saved little sparkles here. Whether I'm going to need them or not, we'll determine that later, as well as here. This remains light, though not stark white, and this becomes gradually filtered light coming in from the top. So far, so good. One of the downsides of painting up from the bottom like I love to do is that it can splatter paint throughout the painting. So if you do it, just monitor it, and if you catch them quick, they're almost never any trouble. But often I don't catch them and I see those things later and they're dried and I don't know where they came from, and then I realize, oh, I did that myself. Using a paper towel, these little beads of paint, if you don't want them to dry, they'll backwash and create a halo or a blossom that you might not want. So you can just siphon the end of them off with a paper towel, or you can take a brush, pull the fluid out of it with the paper towel and just touch that. And that'll pick up the little tail ends of your very wet, sloppy washes. All right. It's a very rainy day, so things are not drying that quickly, but it's getting there. The next stage for me will be to begin laying in however much detail I want on some of this beautiful woodwork. Again, I love the beauty of the architecture, but I also have to remind myself it's an important component of this painting, but not really the star of it. So I have to monitor myself and not make it too detailed, too hard-edged, or too much of a focal point. I should be clever enough to do that. I should be. Whether I am or not remains to be seen. But yeah, when you do a painting, when you're trying to finish it all in one sitting, as I am, it requires staging. By that I mean, if you're working on one area of the painting, you may not be able to go back into an earlier portion of the painting if it isn't dry enough. So since I painted this big wet wash first, the top portion is certainly more dry than the bottom. So that means I can start to think now the shine has gone away. I can probably begin thinking about going into the upper portion of the painting at least while this continues to dry. All right. I'm going to make myself, as much as possible, not look at any reference photos. It's another thing I'm obstinately trying to do. I try to learn what I need from my reference photo when I do my sketch, and then I put it away and I just paint from my sketch only, and the reference photo at this stage, I'm fairly confident would just slow me down. It would just teach me that, or try to teach me that I'm doing things that are not accurate. Well, what's accurate is what looks good in my painting. What the reference photo has to offer has been offered. We're done. So here I'm using light reds, little bits of blue to modify. The big deal is to try to suggest that this architectural identity, but fade it off as it melts into the light up above. To do that, I am going to be relying very heavily on flat brushes. This is a little 1/8" Escoda Perla. Pretty beautiful flat brush, though I've abused it over the years. And I left all my preferred flat brushes at the other place, but that's okay. If you don't like an edge, you can gently sort of feather it out with a paper towel or a brush that doesn't have any pigment in it. It's not that this information up here isn't important, but it's not as important as what's happening here, of course. But primarily, it's receiving the filtered light coming in from above before any of this. So it's going to be much more bleached out by the light itself. There's this intricate pattern over the glazing of all the windows of this beautiful Chinese tracery, and I'm trying to develop a way of painting it that, well, that doesn't suck. Not sure I've succeeded in coming up with one yet. Might be a little trial and error, we'll see. Again, the last thing I want to do is over detail it. I just want to imply it rather than stating it too specifically. So what I'm trying to do here, we'll see if this works, is I'm using the flat chisel end of this 1/2-inch flat brush, and I'm just going to try not to overthink it, but just imply a few of the very characteristic horizontal and vertical marks of it. So it's there, but not rendered in a particularly technical way. I don't know, this actually might work. Let's see how it goes. I mean, I have the option to not do it at all, but I think that would be, I don't think I'm going to be able to tell the story of this painting as well if I just ignore it. Because part of the whole experience of this place was these layers of texture, like looking through one thing, then through another, what's in front of and what's behind. It was almost difficult to tell. And a large part of that was thanks to this beautiful way they treated their windows with these wooden screens. Traditionally, there would be no glass in these, of course. They were just screens. I think for the part of the wall that's far away, that's going to be likely good enough, he says as he adds more. But yeah, that should do. This balcony railing, of course, it stands forward of all of that. So it could handle a little bit more detail, a little bit, and a little bit more value range. I'm going to mix up just a little reservoir over here of burnt sienna that's not overly pigmented. Looks okay, a little brown. I do want it warm, so I think I'll toggle back to the light red. Again, this is the Perla brush by Escoda, 8th inch. Saunders paper is a bit softer than Arches, which can be kind of crispy. So it's beautiful, but it does tend to absorb the pigment a little bit. So I have to remind myself that and layer on the pigment a little bit stronger when I want it to pop. We're okay. I'm confusing myself. I can't see what I've drawn here. Ah. So this is the face of this balcony. This is the 1/2 inch Escoda. Sorry, I do tend to turn my board around a lot. Part of it is just to make it easier to reach. Part of it is to control the amount of gravity. If I'm doing a very wet wash, if you turn your board this way or that, you can control how the paint runs down the page. I'm working at about a 20-degree angle today. It might look flat on the camera, but it is not. It's angled. It's not going to be a lot of these really large wet washes like I did first, but that'll be part of it. Now the balcony curves under, so it's in shadow. There won't be a lot of that bounced light, so I often do a lot of that warm light bouncing under balcony eaves and arches and that sort of thing, but because of the low light story I'm trying to tell, I'm going to keep it just cool and shady. This is just plain cobalt with a little bit of neutral tint dropped in. I did that right away so that part of this would bleed into part of that on purpose. So I wanted a more subtle, gradual toggle between sunlight and shadow. Again, just to keep this story of low light going. Yeah, I'm teaching myself a lot of things. I used to use Saunders paper a lot. Got away from it, but I've begun to reintroduce it a bit. It is beautiful. So I ran a little bead of teal, which I think will add some needed cool note. Don't want to overdo it. I want to keep any cool tones in this painting really, really at a minimum. And then back into some yellows for this open doorway behind. And there would be a cast shadow against the screen wall, but I want it soft again and not overly hard edged. So just a soft watered down violet there. The general light effect is what I want, or the light directionality, but again, I don't want these hard edges, so I think I'm going to work a little ahead of myself and start to lay in some of these bits of the tracery and the wood screen here, really just as a way to give, to soften that shadow against the window frame, to make it look a little bit more mysterious and obscure. I can finish it up later, but just to give that harder edge somewhere to run into and to soften it up and to, again, make it look a little bit more mysterious. Yeah, okay. That glow I like. This toggle I like, from subtle warm, subtle cool, back to warm again. I think my earlier wash is dry enough that I think I can become considerably darker here if I want. Before that dries, I have a moment, not too much, but I think I want to do something similar here and tie in shadow that would fall across the upper balcony. And let it bleed into the lower portion. Just so I end it wet into wet, of course, you're going to get softer edges rather than those crisp, hard found edges. Again, a little bit of work on the balcony woodwork just to, again, another way to soften that shadow edge. I want it there, but not there. I want it there, visible, but not too strident, if that makes sense. For now, I think that's good. That'll do. Cool. Looks fine, but a little crispier than I actually want. So I'm going to take my mist bottle. What we were doing here is painting some of the beautiful water towns of China. So this whole experience, this whole trip had very much a misty, atmospheric, water-based vibe to it. So yeah, this kind of effect is really what I'm going for throughout the painting, where things come in and out of focus a little bit. The colors, I want them to be clear, but not too strong. So the warms, I want to be warm, but not cadmium reds. And the cools, I want to be cool, but not deep, deep greens. So far, I'm happy with this. I know that right around the figure, I can get fairly crisp and pretty dark, because that little anonymous creature is the star of my show. So, but the light here is what really matters. So to make the light work, you have to paint the shadow. So I'll have hopefully just one area of clarity and specificity in this whole painting, and the rest of it, I trust, will look pleasingly vague and atmospheric. A little unsure how I want to tone the table to get it. I want it quite bright here, but not so on that side. Don't think I want hard, crisp edges, but I'm not sure I want a graded wash either. And don't you just love hearing my arguments with myself? Some of these things, to be fair, are things I could have worked out in my sketch beforehand. I had a big overall story pretty clearly in mind, but how I was actually going to get there, if I'm honest, I wasn't too sure. I always think you should get your thinking done as much as possible in your sketchbook before you start painting. Then you don't have to do this kind of stop in the middle of a wash, think about what you're doing. But in truth, that's what sometimes just happens. So I'm giving all of you lovely people the benefit of my struggle. But I like to solve problems too quickly if I can. If I have an overall plan, which I do, I think in theory I should be okay. Clearly this is starting to bark out. It needs resolution, but I'm getting there. Here I'm just considering whether it would be advantageous or detrimental to drop in some unexpected color, but I think I will a little bit. I'll mirror a little bit of that teal from up above, just to imply some of the mildew and the patina on the stonework and this beautiful old woodwork. So just sort of a color note, but not a visual signifier. So just an area. cobalt teal and violet is another beautiful, subtle color combination that, to me, really looks, signifies a fog, mist, atmosphere. Obviously, fog, generally speaking, doesn't really have much of a color. And it's a lot about what you don't paint. But if you have to add some color, which you generally do, this subtle complement mix of cobalt, teal, and violet is a beautiful way to go. So I've decided just to dry brush some marks on to try to carve away some of that table, leaving some sparkles of light, keeping it mysterious. I hope that will work. It should. I'm going to mist over the bottom just lightly to encourage some of those tones to run together. Add a little bit more gravity. Watercolor, the one place where gravity is your friend. Yeah, and I think that's good. I think overall I like those effects. I think we'll be fine. This portion ultimately is going to get fairly dark because we'll see portions under the table and in really deep shade. So some of this value will pick up here by the time I'm done, sandwiching that light figure in the corner of the table and chair in some deep darks. Another opportunity, if I want to add some of this ultramarine, maybe violet. I see I'm adding a bit more cool overall than I intended when I started, but it's just emerged as I think the way to go as I'm painting along, so I feel okay about it. Before I'm done, I'll be going back over some of the major wood elements and adding some deeper versions of this warm. So I think the overall balance of warm, cool will be less of a problem than I originally expected. All right, this side perspectively is very oblique, so we're not looking as directly at it as we are this wall. So I can get away with even more mystery and less detail over here and just make it a story about transitions of light. That's what I'm telling myself. So up top, very similar treatment, but I'm going to worry less, I'm pretty sure, about this kind of very nearly finicky or finicky adjacent treatment. Again, the light coming in here is soft and filtered, but it is coming in. So this part of the wall will be, or this balcony will be slightly more light than that overall before we're done. To that end, I can now add a little bit of just dry brush tonality to this. I think for this wall, I'm going to treat the main portion with a mid-sized mop brush. Just clear water up top, clear water in here. The overall rule of thirds comes into play here with the dominant vertical, the dominant horizontal meeting more or less right there. So I want this side to be a little heavier, so I'm going to add a little more tone over here. Do a similar wash of just warms. Here you can see we're turning the board on its side is a benefit because I'm doing this long, what would have been a long vertical wash. It's a lot easier to do it horizontally because of course the water runs this way. So to get there, if you just flip the board on its side or upside down or whatever way you want the water to run, just do it. So that was Naples yellow, a little bit of light red. I think some burnt sienna snuck in there just by, it got mixed up in my palette, and this is some of the mineral violet. So it's just a tonal wash. It's not having a great deal to do with the actual architecture of anything there. Just to add tone to anchor the painting in the vertical third against the horizontal. Looks fine, but while that's wet, I can drop in some tonal identity. This is burnt sienna, I think. It's got some violet mixed in, but never mind. It's just wet and wet painting is, I have to say, very often my favorite because it's, you never know entirely what you're going to get. This is where you just have to trust watercolor to do what it's going to do, and sometimes you just gotta get out of the way and watch it happen, not try to control it too much. Here this bead of water is running down, and I don't think that's going to add anything, so you can control that if you want. I will. I'm just going to feather that out. I like this little sparkle of light, which I didn't honestly plan, but it just evolved, so I'm going to leave it. This washed down nicely over my floor, so I have some sparkles of light, but not pure white. I think that's okay. I could see a little sparkle of pure white over here, but it's gone, so I'm not going to lose any sleep, but I may try to reintroduce a little bit of light there by some light scrubbing or lifting. We'll see. That'll be very near the end game. This is all really, really wet stuff here. So as I say, I think this is a good opportunity to get some of that sandwich tonality of violet blue happening. And while it's really wet, it's a great way to add whatever you want to add without edges. You can't hold an edge unless you're painting up to something that's dry. But here I don't want any edges. I want these subtle, gradual transitions. Such a beautiful quality that watercolor has of being able to do all these things. It can whisper, it can shout, you can transition very gently, or you can have a stark, hard edge. You can have all of those things going on in the same painting in watercolor, and they can look beautiful together. So yeah, generally I like this transition. It goes from light, it looks like subtle luminosity coming in, to slightly shadier, and I like the jumps here. I had intended to drop in some more of this teal, but didn't. Not sure at this stage if it's necessary. Again, this really beautiful, I hope beautiful rendition of this Chinese architecture will be beautiful, as I say, but not dominant, not focal. I am going to try to just drop in wet and wet a little of this little cobalt teal story. Sort of some of the subtle light reading through those side windows. All right. At this stage, I work my paintings up almost always from the lightest light to the darkest darks. The very, very lightest lights are, of course, the save white of the paper. So those are the bits you don't paint at all. In this case, so far, we have little bits here, definitely here, little bits here and here, and subtly a little bit up there. So when I start painting, I really start in with my lightest midtones. So I paint the whole painting in from lighter to darker midtones, and generally my darkest darks then are the last things to go in. It's not a rule and it's not always the same, but generally my darkest darks will be the areas that will value, of course, they'll have more often they'll have more saturated color in order to carry the value, and often they'll have crisper, harder edges. That's not always true, but often it is. So what I'm doing now is just wasting your time while I'm waiting for this big wet wash to settle. And I'm noodling around with some of these wet edges, so they'll dry the way I want. But where I am, I think good. I have the lights established. I have the light midtones pretty established. The medium midtones pretty established. The darker midtones will be the next to go. And in this case, they're going to be partially on the architectural elements here, here, here. And then the deepest darks will be all centered around my center of focus. But there won't be too many of them, and they'll be the last to go in. But it'll be really just more of this shadowy areas to really pop out the light. I'll do a little bit of detail work on the figure on the table. He's got some books, papers, sketchbook, teapot it looks like. I don't know what I drew there. And some sort of plant, which I was a little ambivalent about, and I may paint it in or not. We'll see. So what I'm doing is just assessing where I am, figuring out my next move like a chessboard, and being helpfully, I hope, self-critical. Did I do anything terrible? What's working? What's not working? All these things are going through my mind. I like the sense of filtered light coming in, but if I'm honest, I think the light at the top of the page is a little brighter than I wanted it. I like the effect of it, but I don't want this light and that light to be the same intensity, and they're too close now. So even though this is more, it's closer to the source of light, the sun, the sky, I don't want for my painting for it to be too bright. I want all the brightness to happen down here. So I think that should be an easy fix. I'll just wash in a little bit more of this Naples yellow. Easiest way to do it would be with a flat. This is an Escoda Versatile series. That said, I don't want it too dark either. I think we'll go right upside down. Let's be the easy way. Mist over everything so I don't wash anything away that I've already painted. Instead of the flat, I'm going to go with a very large mop brush. These are one of my brushes made for me by Neef company. and just be quick about this and just drop in some Naples yellow all over the top of the painting. Then you mist this off. What that dropping in effect will do will leave some of these streaks, which I want. It's just another texture rather than a smooth wash. I think the textural approach is more appropriate to this painting, and smearing blue on the top of the painting was not part of the plan, but I won't panic. Just mist it off. And it should go away. Yeah, mostly. Yeah, it's still, there's enough white up here, but I thought moments ago there was too much up there. Now the overall look feels more like what I had in mind. And it did give me the opportunity to add some subtle texture up here as well. Often, especially in painting architectural subjects, if you can imply detail without actually painting or drawing it, it's very often an unexpected bonus. And dry brush work, dropped in tonalities, add this sort of texture which begins to look like detail, even though in reality there's not really any detail there. So I think that's better. I haven't lost any of the light. I've enhanced it actually and added a bit of texture, but taken away some of that pure white. So this figure at the table now looks more obviously focal. Downside with painting upside down, especially when you do it quite wet, is I can't turn the page right side up for a moment because this wet wash will wash back on itself and cause a lot of streaks. Blossoms or weird looking vegetable shapes, which we don't want. They're not always bad, but in this case, I don't want them. I may have to break out the dreaded hairdryer, which I hate, but clearly I have a hairdryer, but I don't like to use it. If you're painting very wet, especially on textured paper, the sediment of the pigment falls down into little valleys, and the hairdryer, if you hit it when it's really wet, can blow them out and your wash will dry streaky, flat, and very dull. So I try to avoid it for that reason. I didn't dry it completely, but I think I took most of the shine off, so it's probably going to be okay. Check the dryness. The paper is just taped down. I didn't stretch it like the old days. Really not much need for that. But it's taped down to a gator board subsurface, and it will dry perfectly flat. But yeah, the fibers of the surface of the paper are still fairly wet, even though the surface, for the most part, isn't. So it'll dry perfectly flat. But it's dry enough on the surface that it will hold hold an edge. And for this stage, that's what we need. So obviously this balcony is overhanging, so there's going to be a deep shadow under. As I said earlier, I often use a lot of bounced light, up lights of bright ochres and oranges even. But in this case, I don't want to do that because the light's much softer, and I want this more subtle overcast day feel. So I'm not going to use any of those fancy uplight tricks. I think for this painting they would look false and out of place. So for the shadows then, I'm going to use some burnt sienna, just a medium dark, warmish, brownish tone. I may modify it here and there with some blues or something, I don't know yet. We'll see how it goes. If it needs it, I will. Again, I don't feel the need to go jet black or too dark on it. I think dark enough is the way to go. I'm trying to keep the value range of this painting fairly contained and narrow, as opposed to a lot of my works that have wildly swinging value ranges from super dark to super light. But that is the way you can tell an emotional story in your painting, and you're in charge. Design a value range that works for you, for the story you're trying to tell. Not every painting is the same. So people ask me questions, rightfully so, and I understand. What colors do you use for shadows? Well, there's no answer to that, except that it depends. Do I want it to look like a bright, hot day in southern Italy or Greece? Shadow colors could be very different. Do I want it to look like an overcast day in China? Shadow colors, very different again. Often, however, shadow colors they can be whatever you want, which is one of the great pleasures of watercolor. Literally anything you want. What works best with your painting is all you need to ask. But if you want to be so-called accurate, shadow colors are very often a darker version of the surface upon which they're falling. So if they fall against a warm wood surface, your shadows could very logically be warm, a darker family of that warm, but still warm. They don't have to be gray and purple and sad and miserable. Because you don't paint white in a watercolor painting, you just reveal it. In a way, philosophically, all we're painting in a watercolor are the shadows. So if that's so, why not paint them beautifully with loads of translucence? But no, I don't use things like Payne's Gray or Indigo. One day I might, but I find them really unforgivingly sad colors that are hard to work with, and they don't really add a lot. You can get the most beautiful blues, grays by using complements, slight warms and cools. Here I dropped in a little cobalt blue into this burnt sienna light red shadow mix. So, it is gray, but it has character and nuance and luminosity that you're just not going to find with a ghastly Payne's Gray or something like that. I know a lot of people use it and love it, and I'm not saying don't. I'm not saying don't do or, I'm never saying do or don't do anything. we don't all paint alike. Of course we don't, nor should we. So you may be after entirely different effects than I. And Payne's Gray could be your savior. What do I know? But generally, for the kinds of things I'm trying to do, it's a setback, not an advantage. So, well, obviously I'm painting the shadow bits of the underside of the balcony, some of the beginnings of these window details. I'm talking to you, but I'm also painting, and I'm also talking to myself, trying at the same time. I'm working triple duty here in my struggling brain. But I'm trying really hard to remind myself not to fall too much in love with all these architectural details, because for this kind of painting, they're not necessarily going to make it a better painting. I want to add the impression of them, but I don't want to do a portrait of them. I'm just trying to build up this textural background for the figure at the table. I don't want any of this to even start to look like it's competing with what's happening here. But I definitely need some of this texture. So add a little detail, a little non-detail, some dry brush mark to just sort of imply some detail. A variety of brush marks is almost always the way to go. So here I'm a little tight. Here I'm just being suggestive and impressionistic. Here I can tighten up again a little if I want, just to kind of get this rhythm. So viewers, I have found, just don't need everything spelled out to them. You can show them just tiny little bit of detail, and the viewer's eye will fill in most of the rest. It's quite amazing. And if I can make this clear to myself and you, I'm doing any of this not because it's really there, not because I'm trying to be accurate to the architectural identity of this place, as much as I'm trying to tell this story, this experiential story, and the texture, the subtle light and the texture of this building were part of that experience. Otherwise, I wouldn't bother at all. You could easily imagine doing just almost a portrait of a guy perhaps sitting at a table if you wanted. Just zoom in and do that. That's valid, and I could see doing that. But another thing that's valid is trying to paint an overall experience of a place. And I have to say, as a painter, I'm very often trying to do that. I'm trying to bring in my love of built environments into a more human, experiential event, where I'm really trying to paint the emotional effect and the experiences of the built environment. It's not that easy to do always, but it's possible. I just don't want to do building portraits or scenery or architectural landscapes so much, if you will. So yeah, it's sort of a needle to thread. Assessing where I am, I think this overall level of detail is fine, but I feel some warning whistles going off. Like maybe it's a little bit more than it needs to be. So that's okay, but I think what I've got done is fine, but I think for the rest, I'll begin to feather it out more. Again, this isn't a rule, but it's something I try to do, which is when you identify the center of focus, which is here, that's where your harder edges are likely to be, your crisper edges, your more saturated values generally, the brighter colors if there are any. But radiating out from that point, so here, and then radiating out from that point, less and less detail, less and less specificity, less and less saturation. And again, that's not always the case. The center of focus of your painting can be an area, not just a spot. So you could have a whole swath through your painting, vertical, diagonal, horizontal, whatever, or freestyle. And yeah, this case, however, it is a contained area. That was decided too as part of my, part of the way I'm trying to tell the story here, is to keep things quiet and contemplative. Here you're literally looking through this open door at additional doors and windows beyond. So I sort of want them there, but not there too much. So just very faintly painting them in. With just a suggestion of identity. There'll be some slightly darker bits around the center of focus here and here, I expect, here for sure. As we get up here, again, less and less. So to that end, I will use bits of specificity and then try to fade it out fairly quickly. And one way to do that is if you start painting something like this, it's the underside of these balustrades. Don't feel like you have to paint the whole thing, just maybe one little area, fade it out, another little area. And I think that's probably enough. The viewer's eye can connect all those dots if they need to, and you've told the story. Here, just a gentle, subtle, faded line. Hopefully not too much, just enough. Loads more of this wooden tracery screen detail. It's so tricky. It wants to be there, but it can really threaten to dominate the whole painting if I go too crazy on it. I could do it. I could sit here all day and just do an absolutely faithful rendition of all this glorious detail, but I'm aware for this painting it would be a mistake. And I'm most definitely not looking at the reference photo. If I do, I just know what'll happen. I'll start thinking, oh, I didn't paint this, I gotta paint that. I have to add this, I have to add that. No, you don't. What matters now is my painting. Nobody's going to, for the most part, look at your reference photo and judge your painting. I don't even have a reference photo of this space from this angle, which is all to the good. I just designed it and made it up from other information I had, so that's good. It immediately got me a little bit out of the reality of photography and more into the reality of my painting, which is where you need to be. I'm missing my other flat brushes. I have these really cheap acrylic synthetic flat brushes, which I'm not going to say they're good, but they're useful in that they allow me to do these dry brush marks. The paint runs out of the bristles so quickly that you get those scrapey, aerated dry brush marks that can be so beautiful. And it's harder with a nice brush because it holds more water. But I'm going to make do. Hard to feel like I'm saddled with better quality materials, but in this case I am a little bit. So you see, I've added some of the shade sides of some of those architectural elements, but I've gradually tried to make them softer and less crispy than what's down here. I think it'll work. I think it'll be fine. All but clueless how to handle all this woodwork, so I'm just going to go back to this number 10 Versatile. It has a very crispy point because it's a new brush, and just sort of intuitively paint in a few little marks and hope that I don't overdo anything. Good. All right, I want to bring this tone around, do somewhat similar treatment to this wall. Then we can begin moving into the end stages. There's these little supplemental screens, which I could have edited out, but I really loved, so I didn't. I confess. I told myself they enhance the overall textural story of this painting. Well, maybe they do. But maybe they could have been edited out too. Because to be honest, I think they're just extraneous little details that aren't really bringing that much to the party. All right, I used some sepia. And dropped into it here and there some burnt sienna, some ultramarine blue, some cool into the warm, it's near the center of focus, so I can afford to be a little tighter here. And then as it stretches away over toward this side of the painting, I can be much less specific and even less saturated. Like I'll just toggle it out to more cool. So into that messy wet wash, I just dropped some cobalt. Tonally and color-wise, I like it. I think the edges are too strident, but I'm not worried yet. I'll get there. I'm going to feather some of this down in. We need to do this now while this is still wet so that those little areas connect. I love all things in my painting connected if possible. Physically touching one thing, just bleeding into the next whenever I possibly can do that. Sorry, I try to keep up this running dialogue of what I'm thinking, but I got a little tangled up in the not being able to tell what I drew, but it's okay. Yeah, everything's fine. I need to hurry up though before this dries more because I want to filter that wet wash up into the try to knock back the specificity and the edges and all of that to just connect all things. So I'm specifically, intentionally messing up those edges. And what I hope that does, it just gets all of these elements to fit together more organically and not look so obvious. I wanted it to all look a little bit, a little mysterious. Doing the same thing here with some of that cobalt teal in the upper windows to bleed some of those shadow colors down where the warms can just become the cools. This paper is somewhat textured, not as textural as I'm used to working on, so some of the dry brush marks are a little more subtle. It's what I wanted, but I'm so used to that highly textured paper, it's a little bit startling. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this effect. It's sort of like the clarity of the building is coming in and out of focus in a nice way that I wanted. Yeah, it's pretty good. This wall's or opening is quite deep. I don't need to be so literal and so accurate about it, but I think the dark tone there will really help emphasize the center of focus and strengthen the overall composition. So as I remember it, at least, it is pretty deep. I think the darkness is correct, but the tonality, at least at the top of this, I think we want to go. I'm a little ambivalent. I think we want to go lighter at the very top, as if some light is shining through, and then it'll get darker as it comes down. So this is not strong yellow, but a French ochre. wall behind it so wet. Sepia. Yeah, it's too wet still. That's all right. I think these soft edges in the long run will help me get to where I'm trying to go. And some deep blue at the bottom. Okay, I love all these wet edges running into dry edges, but wow, you can cause yourself a lot of cleanup on aisle 3 over here. A little bit of on the job designing. I'm just using what's there and trying to work with what's there to some of these scrappy wet areas I'm trying to turn into advantages by suggesting some of this detail I have to do anyway and play around with some of the edges that are already there in a good way. Another one of the great things about watercolor, you can always freak out, scrub it off, wash it off, start over, or you can just say, well, I didn't really plan that, but I can work with that. I can do something with that. More often than not, you can. And you end up with effects and moments that no way in the world could you have planned them, but they just happen and they can be beautiful. So overall, this effect of this wall is pretty much what I had in mind. It's, you know, definitely there, but not overly designed or detailed. But I may as well try to finish out this lower segment here since it's so wet all around it. this overall effect is pretty much what I hoped. I wanted some sparkles of light without being pure white. And I'm trying very hard to get a little bits of clarity to just melt away into larger impressionistic passages. And generally speaking, it's working. So the bottom of the painting wants to be darker for sure to anchor everything and to help pop out the light. So I think I'll bring some of this tone across. I've been gradually building it up as we've been going anyway. So while I'm here, I may as well do that. This area wants to match that in intensity. I wanted slightly bluer tones around the figure. And it got a little bit warm, but it shouldn't be a problem. I'll just balance it out. There we go. The blue is just kind of whatever I'm sticking my brush into, but I'm trying to favor the deeper French ultramarine in these shadowier areas against the sepia and the burnt sienna. It's a lovely, deep, cool contrast. So always this is where I run up against my problems. I love to draw so much, but I can become a victim of my own passions, as we all do. But arguably I drew too much detail and too many things just because I was having fun drawing. I don't need all the specificity on this table, for example. But because it's there, instead of just painting fluidly and quickly, I'm keep stopping and looking at what I'm drawing and trying to be true to it, and then having to chide myself and say, oh, stop it, just paint. And just paint is the answer. All right, so I wanted some of this raggedy dry brush stuff happening, which is I think now I want to do a larger wash over the shadowy area to enliven the shadows on this side. For that, I will get a mid-sized mop brush, I think is the way to go. I also am wrestling a bit with the paper. I can see it's soaked up a good deal of the pigment that I already put down moments ago. Not tragic, but a little frustrating. So I'm going to amp up some of those again. This is some of the teal. Yeah, it's really pulled up so much of the pigment. Softer paper can be very beautiful, but it can be a problem child too. As thicker paper can, like 300 pounds. Oh, I've done paintings on 300 pound, say, arches, and then I'll go to bed feeling smug and happy with myself, and I'll wake up in the morning and they've all faded out to almost nothing because the pigment just soaks into the fibers of the paper itself. So, word to the wise, be careful with very thick paper or very soft. It definitely will affect the intensity of your washes. So I am going to use, just because of that, a little bit of this cad orange mixed with some of this cobalt into that open window door area. Normally I'd avoid it, but I think because of the paper, I'm sure it will soak in some of that intensity and hopefully leave me with this nice warm glow back there. Bring it down into some violet at the bottom. Some deeper violet, which I'll mix with some French Ultra and try to bleed it into this. Overall, the effect is pretty good, but it is now time for me to resolve my indecision about this table. Okay. Clear water. Always a good start. Little bits of the orange. What I'm doing is trying to save the light, but not the pure white of it, and trying to mess up the edges enough so that it, again, looks there, but not too much of a focal point. As if it's just emerging from the light. And yeah, I think that helped. I think that works. It's generally working. It's a little bit more ambiguity with some splattering. Gravity. Add a bit more sepia. So to recap, what I'm doing at this late mid stage of the painting is adding the darker mid-tones lighter midtones are done and the lights are done. And we're just queuing up for the last stages of the darks to go in. But overall, I think that helped. I think that enlivened this back wall, but also the wash over it had another added benefit of sort of melting the edges slightly so that it looks a little farther away than it did. It looks more like, I keep saying this word container for this experience, and I guess that is a good expression or a good description. I want it to look there, but not focal. I want it to be there, but definitely as an enlivened background to this character at the table. I think what I'm going to do now is let this air dry rather than hair dry it. And then I'll come in and add the final details, the figure, the lights, and anything else I think it needs. But it's substantially on the way to being done, probably around 80%, 75 to 80%, maybe a little more. And I'll sign off now. I'll finish this. And of course, post it with the final so you can see what I did, but at least you saw all the thinking, the planning phases, and the initial establishment of the experience of light here in the beautiful guest house in China. Well, I hope everybody's having a good day and happy painting, and I'll see you all again soon.